Well, good morning, everyone. I'm wondering if it's still morning. For those of us that have been up since 4, it feels like 7. So this evening, I'd like to welcome everyone to the American Women Artists Symposium for Women in the Arts and the 2023 Pushing Forward and Reaching Back. My name is Christine Grafey-Dreer, and I'm the president of American Women Artists. We're so happy that you're here. I welcome friends, family, patrons, members, Brookgreen Gardens. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to our fearless leader, Sandra Harris. Sandra is, the words I like to use are bright, informed, intelligent. She guides us. For those of you that I'm looking around and I see families and gallery owners and people that have to continuously interact with artists, and particularly women artists. So another word that I would use for Sandra is patience, as she has to do a lot of wrangling at times. And she has done a beautiful job presenting this show and the work that we have put together for you since she has arrived on our staff, and we are so happy to have her. I give you Sandra Harris.
Thank you. I don't know if I can live up to that, but I'll give it a shot. And I echo the welcome to everybody to the 2023 Symposium on Women in the Arts. The theme, Pushing Forward, Reaching Back, you'll see explored in different ways today. So forward, thinking about moving forward in careers, whatever area of the arts you might be, reaching back to those that are coming along in different stages of their careers. So we're going to hear from incredible women today. Before we kick it off with our first speaker, I want to acknowledge the board that are here, if they could just stand really quickly. Our board of directors. Yes, Jean, that includes you. And we have former board members. Diana is here, yay. These women are volunteers. They are from all over the country, came here to support, and they do so much behind the scenes. Our show committee that worked on the exhibition is here too, if you want to stand. That's one more person in addition. There's Lisa. Thank you. It takes so many of us, and they work tirelessly to do that. I echo the thanks to Brookgreen, Robin Salmon, who is the VP, and she will be speaking to us today. I have put their staff through the ringer because you're asking so many questions and trying to get all the details. So they've been incredibly patient and helpful, so we thank you for that. And last but not least, we have a sponsor for today, Edmund S. Twining III, who we call Ned, who's here, who's making this completely possible, period, full stop. And of course, his beautiful wife, Diana Reuter Twining, who is a former board chair. She is in the show. She has her work exhibited here at Brookgreen. That's right. Without them, we would not be where we are, and I just want to acknowledge that. We also have online. Those of you who are here, I hope you're not too bashful, because we are streaming online, so hi to everybody online. And they will be asking questions, and when you ask questions, they'll hear your questions, so it's going to be really fun. So housekeeping, we're going to kick off the day with a couple of our speakers, then we'll break for lunch, and then we'll come back and we have a round table of women that you don't want to miss. But to start us off, Dr. Jann Haynes Gilmore, who you saw stand as one of our board members. She's an art historian, focuses a lot on women. If you look at our website, she has a blog that she does entries every other month. You've got to look. They're incredible. She finds women artists you might not know about, finds details you might not know. And she also, in her spare time, took on researching AWA's history. For those of you that are new to AWA, we're over 30 years old, but we had not done a comprehensive documentation of what we've done. And Jann took it on. She went through random Word documents, emailing people, what do you have? Can you send it? Can we gather it? She did oral histories and spent so much time, ended up with almost, I think, 200 pages for us to be able to refer to, learn from, and help us learn our own history, which is so invaluable. And today she's going to show you a bit of what she did. So I give you Dr. Jann Haynes Gilmore.
Well, some of us are renting a house here, and we've learned a lot from each other. We haven't been together for, 3 years? And I need to write another chapter to this history because I've learned some things that should be in it and a lot of things that should not be in it. So coming here, it's very hard under these beautiful live oaks and the Spanish moss swaying in the wind to think about the Southwest and rodeos and chuck wagons and cowboys. But that's the way we started, and when I wrote this history 2 years ago during COVID, my plan was to come out on a stick horse. I own a Stetson from Santa Fe with a Stampede strap, and I was going to come out, if we had music, to the song, Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys, written by Bruce King, and we all remember it in 1975, and you'll understand why I say that in a moment. So this history goes to 2022, and I want to explain a little bit about the history. It's online, it's not printed. If you ever want to read it, it is approximately 200 pages. But in the additional appendices, I used every morsel of written material that I could find, and the first appendix is a summary of the years from 1991 to 2022, and what is nice about it is there's finally a record of our president, if we knew it, and our executive director. And before this, we did not have that record, and also as many participating artists as I could find. The second one, appendix related to that, is there were 83 artists, women artists, who participated in the first 7 years of our existence at the Tucson Museum of Art. So I did 12 interviews, and I'm very intimidated today because some of them are here. And I worship at the ground of Donna Howell's sickles. We will just say that. Because as I finally talked to her this morning, it's been amazing to me. I did not have to interview her because her voice is a thread throughout this 32-year history. It really is. I heard you through the record. So we've had geographic distribution. I think you will be interested that 60% of all of our annual meetings and exhibitions have been in the American Southwest. So we're happy to be here, and we have come east, and we're pushing forward. And we've had one international show. So I have a lot of slides. I'm just going to speak extemporaneously and get through as much as I can because it's hard to encapsulate 200 pages. This is the Tucson Museum of Art in the historic block in Tucson. It became this configuration in 1975, and we were there for 7 tumultuous, I'll just say, years, from 1991 to 1997. It was an invitational show. The director called it the best women artists he could find in the Southwest at the time. This is an invitation to that show, and you can see that it's no stopping till Tucson with a very strong bent. And then here is our favorite fan, a journalist named Charlotte Lowe from the Tucson Citizen, and she has reviewed our exhibits at the Tucson Museum, and she's the one whose title of her piece was "Mamas, Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys." And she wasn't very friendly, and she even believed that the gender should not be a separation in art. So that's why I was going to use that. So Robert Yassin was the director of the Tucson Museum of Art, and we had our contretemps with him as well. He wrote his piece for the magazine, and over 7 years, he never changed it. So he wrote the same preface in 1991 as he wrote in 1997, not changing a word. Enter Joni Falk. Many consider her certainly our triumvirate of founders. Joni actually didn't join. We had the first show in 91 until 1992, but much revered, and I put in her birth date. Women back then didn't give their birth dates very often, but Joni is still alive and I think doing well, and so she became a key player. And I know you can't read this, but we are a strong body of women, because by 1992, only a year later, we had figured it out. And I think Donna came in 1992 as well. Things weren't going terrifically. He still insisted, Yassin, on the cowboy theme, Western art. We had to fight to add American women artists. It was originally women artists and the West, show and sell. So that was a big move, but we had a meeting. They did after the exhibition in 1992, and by then we had Shari Carmen, who became an artist liaison. Many of you, Robin, you might know her. She was from Scottsdale, and she became really a professional leader in the administration of our organization. I never could find out if she was paid or not. I don't know how we got her or anything like that. So these are the brief statements after that meeting of the women evolving to take control of their own destiny. And of course, the biggest issue was a solely Western-themed exhibition. We wanted to get away from that, and some details beyond that. John Goodman, anybody here knew John Goodman? He was a real estate developer and cattleman in Tucson, and he started the Mountain Oyster Club. Diane, I know you've been there. And also the Friends of the American Western Art, a very strong organization at that time. And he infiltrated and supported AWA through those 7 years in Tucson. Just was talking to somebody, his wife was also very supportive. She was still alive and died of COVID last year. So in 1993, we were standing on our own legs, and there was a lot of good activity at Tucson. It was a banner year for that show. Joni Falk is giving the poster for the show, but things were bumpy. Robert Yassin decided to hold this black tie and boots ball, and it was these shows were always connected with the annual rodeo to attract visitors, and it was all in the context of cowboy art. So Shari Carmen wrote him this letter protesting some of the things he said, and a much beloved member, early member that we no longer have, Rogue Simpson, created this cartoon. Can you see it? I'm thinking I'm the fat one in the middle. But somebody just told me a story about the character of Robert Yassin. But he didn't listen. He went on saying it was a truly Western show and picking the artists and so on and so forth. So here's our invitation by Suzanne Baker. Some of you may remember. And this is the first really good photograph we have of early members. And the tragedy is it took 20 years after this photograph was taken to identify the participants. So we think we have it right, but there could be many mistakes. But youthful, happy, and really a great group of women. E. Manning Cook, I found it interesting that she signed her name E. Manning, as many artists did, to be successful. And speaking of mentoring programs that we are hoping to do more of, Joni Falk was a mentor to E. Manning Cook. I think that's a great picture. And who is this? This is our own Donna Howell-Sickle. I told her this morning I hate her name because I must have typed it about 750 times. And with her work at the 1993 show. And this is her work. I think most of you know her work. She is an incredibly well-known Western happy artist, imaging the cowgirls, and we all love her work. And so we're so glad she's here today, and I've urged her, if she has any mistakes that I've made, please tell me. So in 1994, things were slipping a bit. 93 was a good show, a good program at the Tucson Museum, but 94 it was Western oriented again. And I have failed to say that during these early years, we had, of course, all male jurors. Women were not competent to jury. And we had also, at that meeting in 1992, said we would invite a famous artist or a well-known artist to join our main exhibition annually. And this is Henriette Wyeth. Of New Mexico, Andrew's sister. And she came and she died 3 years later, but she was a great participant, loved it very much. And this is how our friend, the writer for Tucson Citizen, framed that show. She said that TMA's West show is not quite so wild. And she just said really terrible things like mediocrity, the artists had sent their art, the best art somewhere else, and she just really was negative. And she's still alive, and I tried to track her down. I would like to know if she had changed her mind some. And this is Robert Yassin, and he's alive, but I couldn't find him. But this is a photograph, a fairly recent photograph, and he is connected with the Palos Verdes Art Center in Los Angeles. And he's being, I don't think so, but the text said a Van Gogh celebration. But I would have loved to have talked to him. And very important, we are empowering ourselves, and by 1998, we had formed bylaws and incorporated in the state of New Mexico. So at that time, you see Star York, Joan Potter, and Trish Rowe Kay as the leaders. And you have to understand, there was, at that time, Donna, you said, we didn't want officers, we just wanted a structured organization, but a free-form organization at that time. So we hadn't assigned titles like executive director or president at that time. But we were sure building a strong foundation with our bylaws. And then, this photograph was taken in 2022. That's why that's there. we broke away from the Tucson Museum of Art and formed our own committee and core group of women and moved to our first independent show at the National Wildlife Art Museum in Jackson Hole. And Donna was there, and she gave the first symposium talk, and we had the privilege and the support of the museum. It was really a terrific occasion. And we have to step back further, and then we will go forward. In November 1994, we're up to 97. The Southwest Art magazine featured us in really, sadly to say, the best record we have of an article about us, and there were 3 or 4 pages of our history and listed our members to date, and it's been invaluable. That list of early members, though, through time has changed many iterations, but guess who is illustrated in Southwest Art? Donna Howe Sickles. And back then to Jackson Hole, we broke away a certain part of the paintings in the exhibition and went to the Bennington Arts Center in Vermont. I don't know why, and sadly, the center closed several years ago, and those records have been lost. But we did come to the East Coast at that time, and we're going to go back there again, as you will see. And then in 1998, we're on our road now. There was an exhibition at the Trailside Gallery, not a museum, Trailside Gallery in Scottsdale, and we had a member who was very active there. 99, we're at the Total Arts Gallery in Taos. Robin, do you remember the Total Arts Gallery in Taos? Robin? Okay. Anne, do you remember the Total Arts Gallery in... Well, why didn't you answer? And the reason why we were... And I think we were staying nearby Santa Fe because Star York lived there, Trish Roque lived there, Sherry McGraw lived near there, and Joan Potter lived there. So we were picking our venues that were nearby. It was just easier. And in my interview with York, she said, we all sat in Joan Potter's historic Cassidy studio on Canyon Road, drinking wine and looking at Kodachrome slides to jury in the people who would be in the show. I mean, this was really backward times, but she was amused to tell that story. So the next year is a banner year. It's 2000. Boy, we were all going through millennium changes then, and it's ironic that the city of Santa Fe was involved in the Sisters program with Sorrento, Italy. They had a very progressive mayor, and some of the girls, like Joan and Star and others, convinced them to our side of the world to hold our first and only international show in Sorrento. And it was quite an event. 2 of us went and scouted out. I think they really wanted to take a separate trip to Italy, but they went, and I think, Paula, you were there? Paula? No, you weren't? They really laid out the red carpet, and we have a catalog. Only one survives from the event, and here are 2 of our representatives. And dear Nancy Boren, I think, shared photographs with us, and this is the group in Sorrento, and You may recognize some of the figures. I see Donna there again, Star York, and Kay Palmer. And this is the cloister where most of the events were held. So it was a first-class thing. And if that weren't enough for 2000, this is the catalog that yet again has a list of the founders of the AWA, and it's always different in every historical list you see. And so, if that weren't enough to take the program to Sorrento, in 2001, they held the first Festival of Women in the Arts, and Donna, you were certainly involved in that. And it was the first one, and then in 2001, they did a second one. And it is a very sort of interesting history there. Many participants, gallery participants participated, and here we see from a magazine, do I say which magazine, Are the Culprits. There's Donna again, Kay Palmer, and the mayor of Santa Fe, who remained really supportive of us. But there's more to this story than there was. Elizabeth Sackler, who knows that name? Okay. The opiate pharmaceutical dynasty that we've been hearing so much, the Sackler Museum in Washington. She was living in Santa Fe and underwrote the whole thing, including our luncheon. And she held the reception at her residence and so on and so forth. So our speaker was Judy Chicago, the great feminist artist out of the 70s, notorious today. She created the dinner party, which was a feminist artwork seen by 41 million people, very controversial. And guess where the dinner party resides today? At the Brooklyn Museum at the Elizabeth Sackler Research Center for Women in the Arts. So I'm hoping that that conversation was born at our meeting, that luncheon. And I have to tell you, that day, Joyce and I were in Santa Fe, and I had the experience, I will say, of standing behind Judy Chicago at the post office. And if you know Santa Fe well, most things happen at the post office. And let's just say everything I read about her now was validated that day. That's all I'll say. And it was funny. I mean, I didn't even know AWA existed. I didn't know there was a Festival of Women in the Arts. And then I do my math, and we're right there, and I'm meeting her that day. So, life is like that. And so the next, we're staying in Santa Fe. Leadership is in and around Santa Fe at the McLary Gallery, 2003. And Lisa and Donna, aren't you represented by the McLary still? It's been a good gallery. And in 2004, he linked up with a gallery next door, and I don't have a photograph, but it was the McLary Gallery and the Meyer Gallery on Canyon Road. So in 2005, we had a new director, executive director, and she was named executive director, Chris Westerson, that Donna had brought on, and they had a show at the Texas Art Gallery in Dallas. Now closed, records none. And she brought a lot of professionalism to the organization, especially with public programming and outreach. Kay, Chris, her name was Kay, but Chris was a nickname. I just talked to her a couple of weeks ago. And here, in 2007, we're at the LeKay Gallery in Scottsdale, that is sort of morphed into a more contemporary crafts gallery now, and we see some of the leaders at the time. Beckner, Howell Sickles, Gay Hockenberry, Joni, and I think it's Linda Glover Gooch on the far right. And about photographs, we have very few photographs, and so you're seeing just about every photograph we have of our history. And then in 2008, we went to Pasadena to a very community-supported gallery, Gabriel, and they too closed. So we don't have many records of that. Oh, going back, I would love to know where that banner is. I mean, what has happened to our material history? Well, some say the consequential evolution of our presidents and executive directors, since we've never had a permanent headquarters, much of this material has been lost. Convinced that that banner is somewhere in a closet. And here, in 2009, we came east again at a very famous South Street gallery in Easton, Maryland. And you may know the watercolor artist Nancy Tankersley, and she that gallery is sold and no longer exists. But they were having fun, and Christine, you say that was the first time you joined AWA, and it was a good show. And if you know Easton, Maryland, it's known for its waterfowl festival and one of the largest plein air events in this country every July, and the humidity is 130%. And this is a woman who was becoming our executive director, Debbie Liu and Nancy Boren. I'm sorry, Nancy's not here. A pivotal figure in our history at that time. And Nancy gave us a lot of material from her computers. I wish you would go home, those of you who have been members, and clean your computer and send the materials if you find anything to Sandra. So in 2011, this is me speaking, a historian interpreting, our lowest point, because we were at the Huff Harrington Museum in Atlanta, which is basically... Yes. Okay, thank you, because that's my point. It was a lifestyle retail store. We sold 2 paintings. The 2 really energetic women who had founded it were Francophiles, so they were basically planning trips to France. And it was just a very low ebb. A gallery, we're doing galleries, not that there's anything wrong with galleries, and then down to retail space. So note that Kathy Lemke Waste is in the middle there, and she's going to be a rising star from here on out. What has happened to AWA is it's gone up and down for many, many reasons, but there's always been an angel. There's always been a good year, a fresh start after we've reached a certain point. And Christine Drewer, we laugh and say that every president says, "Not on my watch." So I've heard that, and I've read it many times. But in 2012-13, we went to the Arizona Sonoran Art Museum, and it was just a wonderful show. The Settlers West and many of the galleries opened their doors. I think we were even down in Tubac. And here you see a happy crowd. At that time, Ann Larson was becoming our president, and the one immediately to her left is Beth Ann Koppel, who was our president at that time, sharing that, and Nancy Boren on the right. And here's our first really, you'll recognize the quality of that exhibition catalog, Visions of the Southwest at that show, and I think we've become known as an excellent catalogs that we produced through the years. I wanted to show you Rogue Simpson that drew the cartoon. Masterworks, we've had newsletters from many different periods in our history, and they've been named different things, but I was able to garner a lot of history from there. We went to the Addison Gallery in 2014. I love this. You all had your little, you were having a fun time, is what I will say. And it was on Cape Cod. And then we see that we're going in 14, 15, another great show, another great program, and another great museum, the Booth Western Art Museum. And I think some of you didn't know that we were there in 2014, 15. This is the winner at a show online during that period, and we were then beginning our first online shows each year. Then we went to the Tucson Desert Art Museum, and you see Lainey, who is a master signature artist, and she's usually a sculptor, but I just love this painting that she submitted. 2018, we were very busy. We did the Rockwell Museum in Corning, New York. It was a winter, it was a snowstorm. Diana, you as president, could not get there. And they do not have a collection, but they bought a painting that was donated to a bank, and another painting went to the permanent collection of the in Elmira, New York. 2008 as well, both Rockwell and the Hagen Museum in Lodi. Is it in Lodi? And it was a departure for us. It was a thematic exhibition, Stockton, and artists chose from 12 of their permanent collection and interpreted their art through that one painting, and many have said it was the high point of our programming, our exhibition so far. I'd sort of like for us to go back to some of that. Then, most of us in this room have lived from here on out. 2019, Steamboat, and you see Diana, and a new executive director, Robin Knowlton. And I have to give a big shout out to Robin Knowlton, because she really was terrific during the 3 or 4 years that she was executive director, working with both Diana and Kathy Waste. Look, there you are, Jean. And at the show, and with Gay Falconberry, who you say is a very good friend, you paint together. That was a great show. And then we went back to the booth in 2020. Well, people, what happened in 2020? Pandemic, COVID. And I'm very proud of the board, because we pivoted in about a month to be what was going to be a live program to online. And we did it pretty well. You did? And so we didn't gather there. But the catalog had been prepared, so it was printed. And then in 21, it still lingered. We could not meet. And we made a wise decision in pre-planning just to hold the entire event at the online platform. And we went through all of the programming and everything. And one catalog was published for our archives. From that, we did not do a catalog. And then we were at the Customs House last year, but we weren't there because Omicron came along, and the governor of Tennessee closed us down again. But again, the show went forward. We had painting song. We had a $10,000 prize. I would say 5 years earlier, our grand prize was $1,000. So we're gaining speed. And this anonymous donor is in this presence today, who will remain anonymous. And I go back to the Tucson Museum of Art. I want to say something nice about them. In 1991, they gave women artists a museum setting. That was major. And the way they did it was not always happy, but we overcame that. And they did the show in 2022 on the 30th anniversary. And they have lost good records. And the curator of the show was calling me to ask me if there was anything in the contract that they were to purchase our paintings. And she never found out the answer to that. But Minnie, Donna, I think one of yours was purchased. So I shout out to them. I have never figured out whether it was naivete or just pure gender bias, but it was just what it was. But they may also made the case that it was the first women's art show in a museum. Well, if I'd been there, I'd told them that the feminist movement had been going on for 20 years. So, but anyway, very proud now of their participation. And everybody probably in this room, or some of you know the Guerrilla Girls, who are an angry advocacy for women's art. And they famously said, do women have to be naked to get in the museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art? So maybe this validates it, I don't know. And with that, our logo.
Because I'll take this to get questions.
Okay.
Does that work? Just going to do mic magic. Good. Okay, I'm sure we have questions for Jann, and so people online can hear them. If you just raise your hand, I'll come over to you and be the mic worker. Okay, we'll start in front.
Jann, can you do a quick synopsis on the 25 and 25, who started that and
I had to
how?
leave something out, but Kathy, it's not working. Is it working? Kathy Lemke Waste, that I've mentioned time and time again from Northern California, was brilliant. She was the first person to give us a Facebook page. She was the first person who did the website, and she was very digitally and still is brilliant and very digitally oriented. And in 2016, we had a show, I didn't mention it, at the Bonner David Gallery in Scottsdale, and my heart just sank when she told me in the interview that Clark Olson, anybody, came up with our great mission of 25 and 25 and said to Kathy, if we're going to have legitimacy, if we're going to be accepted, we have to get women on the walls in museums and hopefully buy their work. So she ran with it and came up with the 25 museums over 25 years, and I'm happy to say that we have met that goal. Thanks. Don't start. Don't bring that up.
Define museum.
It has to do with the records. I mean, and sometimes it's a slant like 2012, 13. I don't know if, Sandra, you've had...
I'm landing on 7.
Okay, 7.
Mm-hmm. And then we started the online shows. You know, it was... Okay.
Okay, do we have more questions for Jann?
Come on.
I see one.
Jann, you came up with something that we all found hilarious that none of us picked up on, and it has to do with the titles of our shows, and I'd love you to comment on that.
Well, if you read them, Rising Sun, Visions of the Southwest, these are the titles of our shows. It Might Rain Today. No, that's not one. It sounds like a meteorologist came up with our titles. And and it is true, if you look at the last 7 or 8 years, and you know, maybe we should consider the annual American exhibition, but it really is funny if you start looking at the titles. It's all related to weather. But I'm happy to say that it was a good day this morning because the sun rose, and it was beautiful.
Okay, just another minute or so. Do I have one more question?
Come on, Diana.
No? Okay, well, let's give you a great round of applause. Thank you, Jann.
Thank you.
Monumental task, to say the least. Okay, we're going to give you about 10 minutes to stretch your legs, get some coffee. The facilities are out the door, off the courtyard, and we'll come back at 11 for our next speaker. Thank you. We're about ready to get started again. If you'd like to settle. Okay, I think we have almost everybody back, so if we can find our seats. I hate to interrupt so many fantastic conversations going on. Okay, thank you everybody, and hello again to those that are watching us online. We are back for our second speaker of the morning, and I'm very privileged to introduce Robin Salmon, who I said earlier has been so instrumental and helpful with us having this museum show here at Brookgreen and fulfilling part of our 25 and 25 initiative. And I want to have her title correct, Vice President of Art and Historical Collections and Curator of Sculpture. Huge job here at Brookgreen. And I'm very excited. She's doing a presentation for us today about women sculptors in particular at Brookgreen, and she's entitled it Modelers and Carvers. So Robin.
Thank you, Sandra, and welcome everybody. We're delighted to have you here. Some of you have asked me, how did this exhibit come to Brookgreen? So I'm just going to take a minute to explain that. About 6 years ago, I received Jan Rosetta's newsletter, like I always did. I've known Jan for over 30 years, and she is also represented in our collection. And I read about 25 and 25. Well, I immediately emailed Jan and said, count Brookgreen in. And, it's taken 6 years for it to get here. I thought 1 year. Next year it'll be at Brookgreen, but you all are in great demand. So I need to get my stuff. In founding Brookgreen Gardens in 1931, Archer Milton Huntington and his wife, sculptor Anna Hyatt Huntington, set out to acquire the work of American figurative sculptors. Although not entirely by design, they collected a significant number of works by women, and that practice has continued to the present. In 1992, Brookgreen Gardens was designated a National Historic Landmark, not because of the significant 18th and 19th century history of the land, but on the strength of the significance of Anna Hyatt Huntington's career as an artist and as an important patron of the arts. The National Historic Landmark designation also recognized the number of women sculptors represented in the collection. And this affirmed Brookgreen Gardens' existence as an important historical site for women in America. 3 major exhibit opportunities that occurred between 1893 and 1929 allowed women sculptors to bring their work before international audiences and to begin to move their work increasingly forward. The first was the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893 at Chicago. There, Laredo Taft's female assistants strive to complete the sculpture projects on time. The second event was the Panama Pacific Exposition held at San Francisco in 1915. There, among the greatest icons of American figurative sculpture, The End of the Trail by James Earl Fraser was introduced, along with other important works by well-known and soon-to-be-known artists. The third opportunity were the special exhibitions by members of the National Sculpture Society, held at the Hispanic Society of America in New York in 1923, and the California Palace of the Legion of Honor in San Francisco in 1929. Both were bankrolled by philanthropist Archer Milton Huntington. One of the early champions of women sculptors in America was Laredo Taft, an art history professor and sculptor who made Chicago a focus for sculpture in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. One of Taft's major contributions during the preparations for the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893 was an unplanned one. The work was far behind schedule, and Taft was desperate to hire competent sculptors to help in completing the assignments. In an often quoted conversation with Daniel Burnham, the exposition's chief architect, Burnham was purported to have replied to Taft's request for permission to hire women, "Hire anyone who can do the work, white rabbits if they will help out." The women he hired included Bessie Potter Vanna, Julia Bracken, Edith Woodman Burroughs, Enid Yandell, Carol Brooks, and Janet Scudder, all of whom went on to important individual careers as sculptors. However, the White Rabbits did not achieve these careers without surmounting significant obstacles, including prejudice, sexism, and discrimination. They accomplished this frequently while juggling the societal demands of being wives, mothers, and caregivers to members of the extended family. Some of them never married, believing the burdens of marriage exacted too great a toll upon their careers and diverted too much away from the focus required to create sculpture. Janet Scudder was greatly impressed by the exuberant sculpture of Frederick McMonnies that she saw each day at the fair. Setting out for Paris after the fair closed, Scudder was determined that she would study with him. Making several visits to his studio, she eventually persuaded McMonnies to accept her as an assistant. On a trip to Italy, she saw for the first time the Renaissance sculpture of Donatello and Verrocchio that became a pivotal influence in her work. Her first sculpture produced in this period, Frog Baby, or Frog Fountain, was one of the works purchased by the architect Stanford White for use in the elaborate homes he designed for his clients. With this patronage, Scudder's career was firmly established, and her work was bought up as quickly as she could produce it. Although she was considered a major creator of garden sculpture, such as this delightful tortoise fountain and other works in the Brookgreen collection, she also produced small pieces for indoor placement and received commissions for monuments. Born in St. Louis, Bessie Potter Vanna grew up in Chicago, where her family moved in 1874. In her teens, she studied at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago under Laredo Taft, who later employed her as one of his White Rabbits. Establishing a studio in 1894, Vanna carved out a niche in Chicago's artistic life, focusing on sculptures of women with their children. Rapidly sketched, they were genre studies as well as portraits, evoking a fleeting moment or a familiar activity. She could produce plaster casts from her clay models in large editions and offer them at prices accessible to middle-class patrons. She experimented with the finish of her plasters through tinting, applying soft matte colors to portions of an object to heighten the visual interest of its surfaces. The popularity of these works enabled Vanna to fund her first trip to Europe in 1895. In Paris, she met Rodin, who became an important influence. Back in Chicago the following year, Vanna received fame with Young Mother, a tabletop-sized sculpture of a woman cradling her infant. This work became one of Vanna's most sought-after sculptures and was cast many times. In 1899, she married the painter, Robert Vanna, and moved with him to New York, where her career continued to prosper. Water Lilies, circa 1913, is a fountain sculpture acquired by the Huntingtons for Brookgreen in 1934. She had important solo exhibitions and received large public commissions, such as the Burnett Fountain in New York Central Park and the portrait of James Sherman in the U.S. Capitol. Edith Woodman Burroughs, another one of the White Rabbits, was described by Lorado Taft as among the few American sculptors to develop an original style at the beginning of the century. She simplified the forms in her sculpture under the influence of Mayol and would probably have gone further in that direction, but her early death abruptly ended her career. Born in Riverdale, New York, Edith Woodman was already studying at the Art Students League with St. Gaudens and Kenyon Cox at the age of 15. At 18, she was supporting herself by teaching and by working on figures for churches. In 1893, she married the painter Bryson Burroughs, who was later the curator of paintings in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She studied sculpture and painting in Paris for 2 years. During travels in France, she was greatly moved by the Gothic sculpture on the cathedrals of Chartres and Amiens. Working in the richly detailed neo-Baroque style after her return, she won the Shaw Memorial Prize at the National Academy in 1907. It was during a return trip to Paris in 1909 that she came under the influence of Mayol, an important early figure in the modern movement. Burroughs' work is a departure from the flamboyant style of most of her Beaux-Arts-trained contemporaries. Bacchante, a small figure seductively eating grapes, has the richness of detail stemming from the influences of French art and was acquired for Brookgreen in 1936. For the Panama Pacific Exposition, more than 1,500 sculptures were commissioned from artists all over the world, placed on arches and columns, in niches, in fountains, and in freestanding groups. A crowd favorite among the art on view was Duck Baby, a fountain sculpture by Edith Barreto Parsons. Introduced to an admiring audience, Duck Baby became the poster child for the fair. It was even featured in a poem by Leo Robinson about the fair's last night titled, "After the Lights Went Out." Parsons studied from the age of 15 at the Art Students League in New York City with Daniel Chester French and George Gray Bernard, and she worked as an apprentice to James Earl Fraser. Her best-known works are the garden sculptures she made between 1911 and 1930, including Duck Baby, Turtle Baby, Frog Baby, Joy Fountain, Little Duck Fountain, Big Duck, and Baby Pan. Quoting an anonymous newspaper article about Parsons from the 1920s, though intensely reticent about herself, one may, if privileged to enter that home, breathe there the spirit of the gifted woman who has been able to imprison in bronze the smile of a little child. And Frog Baby was acquired in 1932. Marriage was a formidable obstacle to a woman's career, even when the spouse was an artist. Elsie Ward Herring gave every indication that she could become a great sculptor, but devoted some of her most productive years to assisting her husband with his art. Born in Missouri in 1872, she was brought to Denver by her family in 1887. After beginning her training with local artists, Herring went to New York to attend the Art Students League in 1896. Her teachers, Augustus St. Gaudens and Daniel Chester French, encouraged her to go to Paris. 2 years later, she established a studio there and modeled Boy and Frog, which won a bronze medal at the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis. In 1900, St. Gaudens invited her to work in his studio at Cornish, New Hampshire. For the next 10 years, she assisted him with many of his most important commissions, Along with Francis Grimes, another talented studio assistant, Herring finished some of St. Gaudens's projects underway at the time of his death. However, after her 1910 marriage to Henry Herring, another assistant in St. Gaudens's studio, she helped him become a successful sculptor and produce little work of her own. Chicago native Laura Garden Frazier studied with James Earl Frazier at the Art Students League in New York between 1907 and 1910 and married him in 1913. Her career as a sculptor began with creations of animals, fountains, medals, and coins. With her design of the Alabama Centennial Commemorative $50, struck in 1921, she became the first woman to design a coin for the United States Treasury. She was commissioned to create several monuments, including the heroic double equestrian statue of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, formerly located in Wyman Park in Baltimore and now in storage, and the Elks Memorial in Chicago. Her sculpture, Baby Goat, won the Julia Shaw Memorial Prize of the National Academy of Design in 1919 and it was acquired for Brookgreen in 1935. Pegasus, commissioned by Archer Huntington in 1946, was completed in 1954. It was carved on site in granite by master carver Edward Ratti, using points taken from Laura Garden Frazier's full-scale plaster model set up next to the roughed-out blocks of stone. It is the largest sculpture at Brookgreen. Although she had several important commissions and a distinguished career in her own right, some linked her success to her husband. She wrote, "Jimmy and I had standing jokes between us. One of them was when I finished a job and it was presented, we would wager as to how long it would be before someone would comment to me, 'Bet Mr. Frazier helped you on this one.' One time in fun, I snapped back at a wealthy patron, 'Just who is this James Earl Frazier I keep hearing about?'" You go, Laura. Sally James was born into a wealthy family and married George Paulding Farnham, an internationally known designer for Tiffany & Company in New York. After her beloved father died in 1901, she suffered a breakdown requiring a period of prolonged bed rest. Her husband gave her modeling clay, hoping to alleviate her depression and boredom, and she began to make small figures. Her friends and neighbors, Frederick Remington and Henry Schrady, encouraged her to pursue sculpture. We should all have such friends. Remington referring to one of her early works as ugly as sin, yet full of ginger. Progressing as a self-taught sculptor, she produced portraits, war memorials, and allegorical figures. One of her best-known works was The End of the Day, commissioned in 1922 by ballroom dancer Irene Castle for the grave of her husband and dance partner Vernon Castle, who died in World War I. Joan of Arc, a monument by Anna Hyatt Huntington at Riverside Drive and 93rd Street in New York, has been a visual magnet for artists since its dedication in 1915. Although it was the first equestrian monument of a woman by a woman in New York, Joan is significant for another reason. It was the first sculpture to present Joan of Arc in the appropriate period arms and armor. Huntington was made a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor by the government of France, and sculptor Loreto Taft praised Joan of Arc for its great dignity, calling it one of the most notable achievements of recent years, confirming a solidly built reputation. Two other sculptures by her, Youth Taming the Wild and In Memory of the Workhorse, present man and horse in struggle, each group having its own purpose and message. While Youth Taming the Wild depicts man attempting to control the horse, Workhorse presents the pair struggling as one against the elements rather than against one another. Anna Hyatt Huntington's fascination with horses and her penchant for posing them in windy settings developed early and recurred throughout her life. Winter Noon, Uphill and Downhill, The Steep Grade, and Colts in a Storm All depicted horses huddling into or struggling against wind. In her childhood and as a young woman, Huntington observed and often worked with the large draft horses used for plowing and hauling hay in the vicinity of her family summer home at Annisquam, Massachusetts. After Joan of Arc, Diana of the Chase, done a year before Anna's marriage in 1923 to Archer Huntington, made her name in figurative sculpture. Although the primary model was Marguerite Agnel, a modern dancer in New York City, Diana, shown here in clay, is actually a classically ideal woman. In fact, Anna Hyatt rarely used models and made few preparatory sketches, preferring instead to rely on her photographic memory and her instinct for line and composition. The S-curve, spiraling upward from the goddess's feet toward the horizontal line of the bow, was repeated in many of her most successful works, such as the Young Diana, and in Rising Cranes, a spiral of birds that she remodeled in the crown of a later sculpture, the Wildlife Column, that you can see at the entrance to Brookgreen's Lowcountry Zoo. Gertrude Lathrop, an early conservationist and animal lover, was one of America's finest animal sculptors. But in contrast to Anna Huntington's spiritedly robust creatures, Lathrop's animals were always elegant and well-behaved. Art historian Beatrice Prosky aptly described her talent. From curly fur and smooth feathers, she extracts lilting line and sweeping contours, dashingly modeled. Sammy Houston, a perky donkey, was acquired in 1934, Little Lamb in 1972, and Bosie, a French Bull Terrier puppy, in 1932. And these are three of several sculptures by her at Brookgreen. Harriet Frischmuth carved a special niche in American art history with her delightful female figures depicting lithe bodies in unusual poses. Known as the lyrical sculptor, she imbued her works with such spirit that her sculpture immediately became popular and was installed in pools and fountains at numerous estate gardens. Using dancers as models, Frischmuth focused on the beautiful line, exuberance, and sensuality inherent in dance moves. Although she used a number of models, dancers Renee Wild and Dacia Delte were the inspiration for works that were her greatest contributions in this special genre. Renee Wild was the model for The Vine, a 12-inch high sculpture that was immensely popular and ultimately was produced in an edition of 350. Due to this demand, Frischmuth decided to enlarge it to over life size, using Dacia as the model. This version, too, was well received and entered a number of museum collections. Dorothea Greenbaum was chronically ill when young and could not attend regular school. Instead, at age 15, she enrolled in Saturday morning art classes, where she studied under the painter Kenneth Hayes Miller. Greenbaum painted for years until a friend gave her a piece of modeling clay while she was recovering from an accident. She sculpted for the remainder of her career using traditional materials and techniques. Her figurative sculptures were inspired by nature, and her favorite subjects included women, children, and animals, either carved directly in stone or cast in bronze from molds made of her stone sculptures. Rooting Hog was acquired in 1935 and Gentle Taper in 1948. Malvina Hoffman's commission to travel and record in sculpture the world's racial types for the living races of mankind, a landmark exhibition at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History in the 1930s, stands alone as a single major project by a sculptor, as well as an important contribution to American art and anthropology. Races of Mankind consisted of 105 separate pieces, some cast in bronze, others carved in stone, depicting people from diverse cultures. Hoffman tried to capture the moment at which each subject represented the individual characteristic of his race, elevating each sculpture from the realm of anthropology to fine art. Modeled on site in 22 countries around the world, often in remote locations under challenging physical circumstances, these works are remarkable portraits of individuals, many of whom had never been exposed to the world outside their regions. The Hall of Man was a key attraction of the 1933 Chicago World's Fair and a favorite of visitors to the Field Museum until 1968, when the exhibit was dismantled. But today, 50 sculptures are back on display. Brookgreen acquired Ballet Dancer and Andaman Islander in 1936. Brenda Putnam began to create a series of Mary Children in fountains and sundials, such as this one at Brookgreen Gardens, about the time she shared a studio with Anna Hyatt on 12th Street in New York City. Like Janet Scudder, she made a name for herself with engaging portraits of children that were commissioned by eager parents. Later in her career, her style changed to a more plain and somber presentation that evoked dignity without sacrificing the tenderness found in earlier work. An example of this period is Communion, dating from 1949. The only woman admitted as an assistant in Daniel Chester French's studio was Evelyn Beatrice Longman. After 3 years, she opened her own studio, but retained her connection with French, a relationship that grew into a lifelong friendship. French asked her to create the wreaths, eagles, and inscriptions on the inner walls of the Lincoln Memorial, completed in 1914. Her professional debut as a sculptor was with Victory, a male figure designed for the dome of the Varied Industries building at the St. Louis Exposition of 1904. A casting of the maquette was acquired for Brookgreen in 1935. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney was born in New York City in 1875, a daughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Gertrude struggled for years against what fellow artist and friend Guy Penet Dubois called the wall of money. Sometime after her marriage to Harry Payne Whitney, she studied with Hendrik Anderson and James Earl Fraser. Later, she attended the Art Students League and, going to Paris, worked under the instruction of Andrew O'Connor, who had been an assistant to Daniel Chester French. During this period, her work attracted the interest of Rodin, who gave her criticism, although no formal instruction. A shift toward more expression and passion began to appear in her work. Caryatid in the Brookgreen collection is the maquette for one of 3 male figures designed for an over life-size fountain located at McGill University in Montreal. Anna Coleman Ladd, nationally known sculptor from Massachusetts, sculpted busts of many famous people, including ballerina Anna Pavlova and actor Ethel Barrymore. But during World War I, she organized the American Red Cross Studio to make portrait masks for disfigured soldiers. Through this work, she became a pioneer in anaplastology, a branch of reconstructive plastic surgery, learning the art of skin grafting and creating masks and prostheses to cover soldiers' wounds and scars. Her sculpture Lotus Flower was acquired in 1936 for the Brookgreen collection. Barbara Leckberg studied at the University of Iowa and came to New York after World War II to begin her career in art. Known for welded metal figures, Leckberg learned to weld at the Sculpture Center in New York City during the late 1940s. She stated, "From earliest childhood, I have studied the way things move, the way sheets billow in the wind, the stress and release of athletes and dancers." Barbara's work was different, not only in her choice of material, usually a combination of hammered, welded, and cast metal, but in her interpretation of the subject. Loie Fuller, Vortex, a bronze sculpture inspired by an earlier welded figure, presents the fluid movement of a dancer spinning while her skirt swirls around her body. Cleo Hartwig belongs to a group of direct carvers in stone or wood, which includes both Jose de Kreft, with whom she studied, and Vincent Glinsky, her husband, with whom she shared a studio for 24 years. She preferred working with hand tools rather than power tools because of the quieter atmosphere, the slower approach, and the ability to achieve greater subtleties in the carving. Her early interests in small animals, birds, insects, and plants established a preference for forms found in nature and subjects in diverse materials such as marble, limestone, alabaster, wood, terracotta, and cast brass, bronze, and aluminum. Her work in the collection of Brookgreen Gardens is Resting Butterfly, carved in serpentine stone. In 1965, with her husband, she wrote an article on sculpture techniques for National Sculpture Review. To find the basic essential character of a subject requires keen observation and great study. The simplest forms are the most difficult to see and to translate into sculpture. Leonda Fink was born in Brooklyn, but later her family moved near Audubon Terrace at 155th Street and Broadway, the site of a cluster of museums established and supported by Archer Huntington. As an adult, she wondered about the subliminal influence of the many sculptures by Anna Hyatt Huntington on view there, and that she sketched over and over as a child. After studying at night at the Art Students League, while raising a family, she began to focus on drawing and sculpture. Typical of her sculpture method was a rough surface that was not applied, but as she said, grew from the inside out as the forms developed. Eventually, she began to work with plaster-soaked burlap wrapped around a flexible armature of her design. As it began to dry, she was able to carve the plaster and even to break it and shift the figure's pose using the articulated armature. Saying, "I do what I know," she focused on the female figure. Drawing, particularly in silver point, continued to be an art form that she enjoyed and exhibited. Seated Woman was acquired in 1992, and it's one figure in a group of 3 titled Women in the Sun. Buffalo, New York native Jane Armstrong studied at the Pratt Institute, but left art for a career in journalism. In 1964, at the age of 43, she enrolled in sculpture classes at the Art Student Leagues, studying with Jose de Kreft and John Hovanes. Her subject matter was drawn primarily from nature, and each figure seemed to emerge from areas of rough stone as if it were rising from the depths of the marble. Procession, a group of newly hatched sea turtles crawling to the ocean, is located in Brookgreen's Offner Center, and Veratio is in the Children's Garden, depicting a sphinx caterpillar. Texas native Glenna Goodacre was renowned for her large-scale figurative works in bronze. Though her career as an artist spanned more than 50 years, Goodacre didn't begin to sculpt until she was 30. She was known for depictions of Western life, especially those of Native Americans, such as Basket Dancer. And among her important public commissions were the Vietnam Women's Memorial, the Irish Memorial at Penn's Landing in Pennsylvania, and After the Ride, a life-size figure of Ronald Reagan for the Reagan Presidential Library. Among her works at Brookgreen, in addition to Basket Dancer, we have Autumn Breeze, a portrait of her daughter, and Pledge Allegiance, an over life-size group of children, hands over hearts looking to the flag. Sandy Scott received her formal art training at the Kansas City Art Institute and later worked as an animation background artist for the motion picture industry. She turned her attention to etchings and printmaking in the 1970s and to sculpture in the 1980s. She has made 16 trips to Alaska and has traveled to Europe, Africa, Russia, China, and South America to view wildlife and visit the world's great museums. She believes wildlife artists should be in the field to accurately present their subject to the viewer. And she's also known for sculpting domestic animals, including dogs, cats, and livestock. And we have several sculptures by Scott here at Brookgreen. Colorado artist Verrill Goodnight's interpretations of historic scenes and folklore from the American West often focus on women in their work. Cares for Her Brothers depicted a Cheyenne tale about Iwo Humishihiwi, a woman who cared for all living things, and it was acquired in 1987. Jane Decker's art also focuses on women, often in their roles as mothers and caregivers, but also on landmark moments in a woman's life. A busy mother and full-time sculptor, she unapologetically draws from the world around her for inspiration and subject matter. Can in the Brookgreen collection represents a group of dancing women, arms around each other as they support a friend through a journey with cancer. Recently, Dee Decker was named Colorado Woman of the Year for spearheading the future Women's Suffrage National Monument in Washington, D.C. For many years, Rosetta of Loveland, Colorado focused on cats, domestic and wild, in her sculpture. And in more recent years, she's depicted other animals. She writes, "The subject of my sculpture is an animal's life force, and the aim of my work is not to depict an animal as a simple reminder of something known. My work has been described as hard-edged, yet soft, sensitive, and powerful." Diana Reuter Twining's work joined the Brookgreen collection recently. And her grasshopper is located in front of the Whispering Wings butterfly exhibit opposite the entrance to the Brookgreen Zoo. Kirsten Koken's Waiting for a Sale was acquired in 2010 and can be seen in the Offner Center, along with over 500 other works by various artists. And these are just some of the artworks by women represented in the Brookgreen collection. The time of women working in sculpture spans nearly the entire timeline of American art history. It's important to recognize and celebrate their accomplishments and to revise some of the standard art history reference books to give them a more prominent place in the timeline. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Robin, and bravo, Brookgreen. So I'm sure we have some questions about the collection, Brookgreen itself. There's one. Let me not fall.
Well, it's obvious that women played a very important role from the beginning of art, and I mean down from casting coins to using their artistic abilities to create prosthetics. Was there ever a time that women tried to get together and create an association or a group like the AWA, or were they just pushed aside and ignored for their accomplishments?
What a great, that could be an entire symposium, couldn't it? Robin, do you want to tackle that?
Well, there is an organization called National Association of Women Artists that goes back to the early part of the 20th century. Although it's, if I'm remembering correctly, it's really more focused on artists working in the Northeast because many of them were in New York City when that was formed. Through the years, though, it's grown to include women all over the country. But, you know, there aren't a lot other than perhaps little organizations that are more regional that have been formed through the years.
And I love the idea. I don't think we know, but I bet you're correct. They were probably pushed aside at some point. That would be my guess. But what a great thing to research. Yes.
Robin, I have more of a commentary for you. I've lived in Myrtle Beach area for 28 years and have been a member of Brookgreen for most of that time, and I never realized the significance of women's art here, and I really appreciate you bringing that on.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Anna Hyatt Huntington, as I said earlier, who really was the one seeking sculpture for the Brookgreen collection in the beginning, through the decade of the 1930s, was focusing on quality, not on gender. And along the way, she acquired a lot of work by women, so that should tell you something.
Robin, 25 years ago, I was wandering the gardens here, and I had just started sculpting. I was in awe. And who comes down the path but you? And I'm like, oh my God, there's Robin. What am I going to do? And so you didn't know who I was. You very graciously said, hi, I'm Robin. Are there any questions I can answer for you? And my comment is, over the decade, because of your presence here, you have answered so many questions for so many sculptors, and I just wanted to thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Diana. Well, one of the great joys of my job is getting to meet the artists. And I've made so many really wonderful friendships through the years. Some of you are sitting in this room. And, you know, I just don't think that in any other kind of job besides museum work that you get these wonderful opportunities. But I know I'm totally biased when I say that.
Couldn't agree more. Here we go. We have another one.
I have another Robin story. I've been a sculptor since I was 11, but became involved a little bit with the Sculpture Society. And in 2000, I believe it was October, the wrap-up to a show here, I think I'd had a piece in the show. We were sitting in the tent, and they said, by the way, we have a sculptor here. And in the meantime, Marion Roller had the first artist in residence here, sculptor in residence, and it was really quite amazing. I'd always admired her work, knew her from Salmon and Pen and Brush in New York, and I thought, golly, wouldn't that be fun? So I started to apply, and that was a very bold move for me at the time, for that second sculptor in residence. In the meantime, we'd sold our home, we were moving. I had 4 tons of carving stone I'd brought back from Italy when I worked there, and tools, pneumatic tools, everything else. And I was sitting there, and they said, by the way, we have a sculptor with us tonight who will be our second sculptor in residence, Kathy Farrell. And I went, oh my goodness. And they said, and by the way, you need to be here like next week. So my husband and I drove like mad back to Florida. I packed up the Suburban with everything I need. And the best part is I got to live in the intern house for 3 months. Through December. So I lived, as you come in the Cypress Circle and you turn this way past the administration buildings, there's a beautiful little road back in the woods, and there was a lovely house. Robin furnished it, and I lived there. I was here night and day for those 3 months. I had a little pass to get in and out the gate. No internet, no TV. It was a beautiful, beautiful time to just sink into the sculpture here. I could walk the collections morning and night. Security was wonderful. It was a magical 3 months that really defined the rest of my life. And the love and the care of everybody here, including the zookeepers who live there. Bobby would say, you know how many otters I raised in that bathtub? You know, I mean, it came with a whole family of people that couldn't have been more loving and more supportive. And those were just a magical 3 months. And it was only because Robin and Gwen Peer kept saying, would you please finish that application? And I just let it go because I was moving. And thank you, Robin.
My pleasure. We actually, you referred to it as the intern's house, which it had been up until the time of the residencies, but it was built in 1931 as the zookeeper's house for the original Brookgreen Zoo. And you were sleeping in my parents' bed. Yeah. Yeah, which I had in storage, and there was just a hodgepodge of furniture in there that it really was kind of like being in a big dorm room. And it was amazing that people like Marion Roller and Kathy Farrell and some of those who came after didn't mind staying in sort of shabby quarters. But Garland Weeks, I think many of you here, or some of you here, know who Garland Weeks is, a sculptor in Texas. And he stayed there, and he said that was the best hotel he'd ever been in. That he, what we found is that most artists love the solitude and the access to Brookgreen. I mean, really, it was like Brookgreen became your home. And of course, we can't use it anymore for that purpose. And we house our residents now in Litchfield Beach and Golf Resort, which you all have had the pleasure of getting to know too. But, that's nice as well. That house now is our library archives.
I think we have a question from online. No?
From me.
Oh, okay.
From me.
From you.
For our AWA sculptor members, how would they look at applying for that residency?
Oh,
how do you go about doing that?
me.
Contact Robin. Okay.
What about painters?
What?
What about painters?
Painters, we don't turn painters away. We had one, Rosie Sandifer, who is a sculptor and a painter, and at the time she was our sculptor in residence, she was really painting. She had given up sculpture and gone to painting. And so while she was here, she taught a workshop in both sculpture and painting. So yeah, we can talk about that.
Great. Robin, rumor has it that you are writing a biography of Anna Hyatt Huntington.
Yes.
And if you are, how do you have time?
Well, I don't. I've been writing that biography for over 20 years now. I'm going to have to finish it or I will be totally disgraced. And it's part of it has been, of course, because it's been happening in bits and pieces, which is really hard to do if you write. You'll know what I'm talking about. But the other thing is that Anna lived to be 97. She worked until a year before she died. I mean, she was productive. I don't mean just going and standing in the studio and looking around. The last 10 years of her life were probably her most productive years. And she has an incredible volume of work. And if I'd been smart, I would have done just the biography and not the catalog of her work. But I'm stupid sometimes, and I'm doing both together. And I know. That's why I say I've got to do it or I'll be disgraced.
Robin, I don't know if everybody knows this, but how many years have you been here?
I've been here for 48 years.
And yes. And would you tell us recently how you were honored by that, being there 48 years?
Well, you mean the very most recent?
Yes.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, we had a fine art auction and to help raise some final funds for a studio that we're building. Finally, a new sculpture studio. And some of you in this room also generously donated art to that auction. I found out at the auction that the Sculpture Conservation Lab, which is a major part of the building that the studio will be in, is going to be named for me. And, as you know, in museum fundraising, rooms in buildings are sold. They're a major part of the fundraising as well, not just the name that goes on the building itself. So, all the more honor I felt that, I didn't give any money for that, but I gave 48 years. Yes, we are thrilled about this building. In fact, we're having the groundbreaking Friday, tomorrow, to get started on that. And so maybe next year, sculptor in residence or a painter in residence will be able to utilize that structure.
It was so well deserved. Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell some reasons that she hasn't done that biography, autobiography, or anything else, because for years now, she's been the volunteer editor of the National Sculpture Society's Sculpture Review magazine. And frequently, when someone needs her, she's there. One year, she took over Sandy Scott's Seawee booth because Sandy couldn't come. And at the last moment, as if she had nothing else to do, she spent a week basically doing what she loves to do, talking to people about sculpture. But there's a reason she hasn't finished that.
Well, that's another good thing about my job is, when people say, how can you stay in one place for 48 years? Well, I always answer, have you ever seen the place? Brookgreen itself is stimulating, challenging. I've never felt the need to go anyplace else to do something new, because our slogan, ever-changing, simply amazing, is absolutely true. This place is not the same as the place that I came to in 1975. And it's a privilege to be here. This isn't supposed to be about me. This is supposed to be about American women artists. But I thank you for all the kind things that you've said.
Thank you, Robin. With that, I think we're ready. We're going to take up, and you can get lunch. Actually, the easiest right outside these doors by the courtyard. If you are on the board or a speaker or on the show committee, please stay put in here for now. And we will reconvene at 1 o'clock back in this room to have the fabulous roundtable discussion. Thank you, everybody.